Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Paul Spagnolo, and I'll be presenting on community college funding in Indiana, specifically focusing on the Ivy Tech Community College System and the Northeast Indiana Regional Campus, which is housed in Fort Wayne, Indiana. In order to understand how the budgeting process works and the financing of college for Ivy Tech Community College, it's important to understand the entire system as a collective whole. Ivy Tech is the single largest accredited community college system in the nation, enrolling over 200,000 students. This system is divided into 14 regional campus hubs that have 32 degree granting sites within those regions. Fort Wayne, Indiana is the regional hub for Ivy Tech Northeast region, and it's led by Chancellor Jerry Lee Mosier. It's also the second largest region, and it serves nearly 12,000 students within the region. Part of why it's important to understand Ivy Tech as a single system is that every one of the regional campuses have the same tuition and fees, and everything that is set from a financing perspective is done through a statewide process. And so in order to kind of look at this process, I've tried to break it down in a visual way so that you can see what happens as budgets are recommended and how the financing and budgets move through the system to get approved ultimately at the level of the governor within the state of Indiana. So budget recommendations are done on a biennium process, which is a 2-year process within the state. And it starts off with regional chancellors. So the Northeast Indiana Regional Chancellor recommends a budget request to the Ivy Tech system, which the Ivy Tech Board of Trustees ultimately approves. One of the things I found that was interesting is that as it moves into this systematic point, they do open up a public hearing for people to be able to weigh in on tuition and fee increases, as well as to look at some of the capital requests and to provide feedback to the trustees before they make their final recommendation to the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. Then once it hits Indiana Commission for Higher Education, the budget then is weighed in against all of the public 4-year institutions, as well as Ivy Tech, which is the only community college system within the state of Indiana. So Ivy Tech then is competing at that level with public 4-year institutions. Once the recommendation is considered and done through the Indiana Commission of Higher Education, they move it on into the Indiana General Assembly, and the overall budget is approved by the General Assembly and ultimately signed off by the governor. A couple of interesting things that have come out of Indiana recently as this process continues to get refined is a financial transparency project that started in 2011, as well as a performance-based funding model that they use for all of the public institutions in Indiana, which started in 2003. So the Financial Transparency Project was something that was created by the Indiana General Assembly, and it requires all of Indiana's publicly funded higher education institutions to submit a lot of information that makes it very easily identifiable and transparent on the Commission for Higher Education's website. Some of the things that are included in that are the financial statements, outstanding debt information, and other public financial documents. The Commission then maintains all of this information and consolidates it in a way that individuals can easily see where the financial budgets are and how each of the public institutions are performing. Now, the other part that's interesting in this budgetary process is each of the institutions also has to cash their requests and their funding in a performance-based funding model. So Indiana has been identified as a national leader for performance-based funding by many different organizations, and the first model was created in 2003. It continually gets updated and expanded in order to further align with the needs of the state and the needs of the post-secondary institutions as they go through the funding process. So some of the metrics within that funding are seen here. In fact, these are the metrics that they use presently. And a lot of it does focus around completion, including overall degree completion, how at-risk students are doing in completing degrees, the number of students that are completing STEM-related degrees, which are considered high-impact degrees, the level of student persistence and success, Also interesting and something that the community college does well on is the remediation success initiative and seeing how students are doing with remediation. They also are then looking at on-time graduation. And lastly, the institution has to do a defined productivity metric that they do themselves, which is encouraged to be around the need-based funded students. So as they create their own defined metric, they're encouraged to do a metric that does indicate how they are helping to support students that have financial need. The components of the higher education budget that each of the different organizations move forward, and so Ivy Tech also does this, include operating, how their student financial aid will be done and distributed, their debt and service and capital. It also has institutional line items. They do have depreciation that it needs to be funded, or they name it as repair and rehabilitation. And then, of course, they have some other higher education line items that are also important as well. And so these are the components that individuals, that the chancellors first start off with at the very beginning of that process, and then they put their requests forward that move to the Ivy Tech as a collective whole that then moves forward through that process and ultimately approved by the General Assembly and signed off by the governor. Ivy Tech has a strong position. One of the things that they put forward as they were doing their most recent biennial request is that they indicated how well they are doing in terms of the number of degrees they award in relation to the number of degrees that are awarded at the public institution. Ivy Tech does lead the state in the number of credentials and degrees earned, and it represents 50% of the total increase in degrees that have been conferred in the last 6 years. It also shows that Ivy Tech is the highest return on investment for taxpayer resources. And then the Indiana Commission for Higher Education showed that Ivy Tech graduates have the highest earning in the first year after graduation, which is something they're very proud of. This is a table that shows the tuition fees at Ivy Tech. It's interesting to note that it's about based on a 1-to-3 ratio. As you look at it, the fees stay the same across the board for all students. They do have one $60 technology fee. And the tuition is the same with a discount for military and state employees. And then international students do have a $90 additional fee per semester, but they are placed at the same rate as an out-of-state student. So one of the last things that I wanted to close with is that the Ivy Tech has done something different this year. So one of the new things in relation to budget is that they've put out a freeze and have tried to do an Ivy Tech Community College freeze this year. It was something that is an impetus to help increase the number of Hoosiers or Indiana individuals with a quality degree to 60% by 2025. And here it shows the eligibility as well as the number of credits that a student needs to do in order to stay eligible with it. And as students do these, they will be positioned to graduate in 4 years better. So this is one of the neat things that has been proposed in the last year in relation to budget and finance. Thank you for taking time to listen to my presentation, and have a wonderful evening.